Hey gang, Shane Patrick White here, and welcome to Beyond the Process. I was recently commissioned to draw one of my favorite supervillains, Dr. Doom. And the thing about drawing commissions is it's a lot easier to do in the studio than out at a convention where there's all this distraction and eye candy. At least here I can show you all the steps that give you the best results. I take you through the thumbnails, the blue line roughs, the final pencils, and the inks. But it doesn't mean tragedy won't strike. It's true. I actually make a mistake that I turn to an advantage. If you want to find out how, sit back, relax, and enjoy the process.
Using thumbnails to start any commission can really be helpful, whether you do them in your studio or at a comic convention. They're a way to distill the biggest shapes and the information you want to convey for maximum impact. You may notice that I'm using a weird pencil contraption. It's actually a pencil extender with a blue color erase pencil. Animators used to use similar pencils, both a scarlet and indigo, for layouts. But Color Erase discontinued those colors for some reason. Probably because the whole 2D animation industry largely turned to digital. The reason why I like them is they're easy to erase and they stand out from my finished graphite drawing. Instead of gritting off the page and enlarging the sketch, I just copy what I see directly to 2-ply Strathmore 500 smooth Bristol paper. Because it's just a head and bust shot, it's relatively easy to figure out where to center the main elements and build out from there. Once finished, I go over the piece with a kneaded eraser, picking up whatever excess pencil, so I can then follow it up with my final pencils. Just because I'm doing the commission from home doesn't mean I shouldn't be aware of how much time I'm putting in. After all, time is money. It's important to build up the form of the character from its essential base, meaning I start with a skull, then add a thick faceplate over that, and then the fabric of the cowl wraps around the head. Each of these passes helps convey a stronger understanding of material and underlying structures. I use these pencils made by Trirex. This is a harder lead, a B21, and what I like about them is how thick they are. They remind me of grade school pencils that, when dulled down, create big, dumb lines. What I mean by dumb is they're thick and you can't noodle with them as much, so your shapes are real simple, which is really great for thumbnailing ideas. They make a softer blue barrel version of the Trirex as well. Still, I can get plenty of detail from this pencil. I like how it fits in my hand, and it doesn't cramp up as much after drawing for hours on end. Something to keep in mind when illustrating longer projects. First thing, once I understand the structure, is to figure out where the lighting is coming from. In this piece, the lighting is going to be higher overhead to the right of the image. Planning this out will help in terms of line weight usage and position to the light, and how the shadow falls on other parts of the subject. The great thing about drawing Dr. Doom is that many people have worked on him throughout the years, and there have been many different versions of him. Ultimately, if you get the stance of the character down, meaning you have all the elements that make Dr. Doom man in an iron mask with a cowl, then you can push and pull the shapes and designs however you want without losing the essence of who he is. My approach is less medieval and more decorative sci-fi armor. I don't use rivets, even though I love rivets, but I thought, why not leverage my concept art background and push things into another realm? Why not suggest that he's not a villain who's locked in the past, but is forward-thinking in his ambitions? I mean, he's a doctor, for crying out loud. A medical license in what? Doom? I can't imagine what the tuition would be for such a thing, but I digress. As you can see, I like to block in the head shape to make it stand out and not sort of float unnecessarily. I use a beveled inking triangle that, as you can see, has some black smudges on it. Now, I haven't used this triangle in months, but the laws of the universe don't care. It's setting me up to ruin this piece. Now, whatever was on there has become part of the illustration. I'm fuming at this point, trying to rack my brain what I can use to erase it. They make ink erasers, but I don't have any in stock, and now I'm left with the dreadful thought of having to use white gouache, which is something I really don't like using on a commission if I don't have to. But wait, there are other options. When making mistakes, ask yourself, how can I leverage the mistake? How can I turn an accident into a happy accident? What I choose to do, and what may help you, is to continue on. Think about the mistake, and at some point, the answer may present itself. But here's the one takeaway that will benefit you. Always keep your tools clean and ready to go. Failing this can obviously wreak havoc on you or your work and cause more stress than is necessary. Use rubbing alcohol or Windex and a paper towel to get the job done. The discs on Dr. Doom's cowl I initially freehanded to get the right size and mostly the correct angle. Stay tuned until the end when I show you the basics on using ellipse guides. I then fudge in some nonsense texture pattern that suggests that these were handcrafted in some way. To put in lavish detail would detract from the overall piece. Each element should provide support for the drawing and not pull focus. When you draw chains, it helps to start with overlapping rectangles of equal size. I then add dimension to these rectangles, making sure their thickness is similar throughout. After much practice, this too becomes easier to do. Because this is a shiny chain, I not only add shadow, but I also pay attention to highlights by adding core lines throughout. As usual, I use Speedball Super Black ink and my trusty Winsor & Newton Series 7 No. 3 brush. Jack Kirby was famous for creating what was in later years to be termed Kirby Crackle. It's the energy effect that is made up of a myriad of dots of varying sizes. Because he was such a master of simplification and creating a strong graphic language for comics, these dots suggest a power that you can almost hear sizzling off the page. People have tried doing their own version of it, whether elongating the circles or making them squares, but nothing beats the original flavor of Kirby Crackle. Starting off with an outline of something is how I understand what the thickness of everything to follow will be. I judge the relationship of everything within the container to what I start out with. That means the feathering detail to follow will be subordinate in thickness as I work towards smaller and smaller details. One of the hardest things for me to do is to go back over an outline that needs to be thickened with the same amount of control as before. It can be done, but it takes a lot of practice. That's why when penciling, I try to indicate the thickness of what that outline should be ahead of time, should I forget later on down the road. You'll notice that I worked the entire piece. The reason for this is to balance and compare the size of different details to each other throughout. My smallest details will be textures and tick marks to show wear and tear. My larger details will be spots of black for shadows. The medium details will consist of feathering of different lengths and thicknesses. Because I messed up the face with the inking triangle, that basically sets the scale for whatever textures I use. Details will only be larger by comparison. I don't always get lucky like that, but I have to recognize it for what it is and move on. The whole time I'm inking, I'm thinking about how can I work with that mistake? I'm not beating myself up over it as much because I've learned it does no good. Blame is not a solution. The mistake has already been made, and a solution needs to occur. This thinking also serves a dual purpose. It gets me out of my result-oriented brain, and now I'm just inking using my instincts. When that happens, the work can sometimes become more lively and unencumbered with tedious strokes and unnecessary details. With these kinds of commissions, there are opportunities to try new things out and explore ideas and execution that I may not normally get a chance to do when working on larger projects. For instance, I don't do a lot of cross-hatching with a brush. I don't consistently pull thin enough lines on the regular to make it work for me. But here I can see a real benefit when modeling Dr. Doom's cowl, and to get those subtle shifts of gradations of light. Often I use dry brush in conjunction with feathering as it comes with texture built right in. If you go too crazy with all the variations though, a piece can get out of hand. It's definitely helpful to pick a couple and repeat those approaches throughout to make it feel more homogeneous. As I've mentioned in earlier videos, making materials feel unique to each other within the context of the style you're inking in is very helpful. The metal in Dr. Doom's face armor is going to look and feel different from his cowl and the discs that hold together the chain. You'll notice that I do my best to account for white edges and details. It's another way to keep white out off the page if I can, and exercise my brush control. Because I work on a Cintiq for the majority of my paying work, I will inevitably lose that tactile ability and consistency that I get from traditional media. I can't tell you how important it is to get good at using a brush. Even though it may not be the modern way of inking comics, it's so much more than that. It builds a motor acuity in your hand that can be applied to other traditional media like watercolor, oils, and acrylic painting. And it'll improve your hand in digital work as well. It's so much harder to pick up later in life, especially if you've had any success using other less challenging tools. You're basically shutting yourself off from a whole area of art by having to play catch-up. We've used pens and pencils since we were kids. Of course it'll be easier to ink with those, but a brush? Well, that's what will make you unique. Faber-Castell Pitt pens come in a variety of sizes: medium, fine, small, and extra small. I'm using a fine here for these ellipses, but I will drop down to a small if I want to get more detail. When using ellipse guides, there are a few things to keep in mind. They have 4 lines on each of the ellipse sizes that are your marking guides to help with alignment. Mark them off, connect the dots, and draw a nice clear X to slide or align the guides into place. A good rule of thumb when using ellipse guides is to start with your innermost ellipse and work your way outward. As you align the next size up, you can visually make sure there's the right amount of space all the way around your ellipse. And when you get to the outermost ellipse, that is the one you will want to be thicker than the rest, making sure it's well within the thickness threshold of other elements that you've created. When I used to work on the Harley-Davidson license years ago, I learned that for clarity, it was important that every separate object of the bike, like brakes or wheel mounts, had to have its own thick outline. And the detail had to be 1 or 2 pen sizes down from that. This helped promote clarity overall. When inking the organized texture in Dr. Doom's discs, it gives it some noise that may suggest they were sculpted. Enough, anyway, to convince you of craftsmanship of some sort. In the end, I chose to use Daler Rowney's FW acrylic ink with my trusty Hunt Extra Fine 512 nib. If I'm going to use white, I want to use it for effects more so than fixing any mistakes. I'm able to add interesting details back into the black and clarify any details that may have gotten away from me. I like this better than gouache and brush, and better than paint pens or whiteout pens. It's so much more reliable in the end. Well, that's it. I hope the techniques and approaches I shared today prove to be of value to you. Good luck to you in your work, and remember to have fun.
Thanks again for joining me today. If you found any value in this, hit the like button. Better yet, subscribe or tell a friend. Until next time, thanks for watching.